The rain had not stopped since dawn, painting the streets of Devon in a dull, silver haze. From the window of her small cottage, Margaret Holloway watched the endless drizzle soak the garden her mother once tended so lovingly. The phone lay on the table beside her cup of untouched tea, vibrating with a message she had both hoped for and dreaded. It was from Amelia, her only daughter. For days, Margaret had been calling, leaving messages, pleading for Amelia to come home. Her mother, Eleanor Holloway, was dying at the local hospital, her breaths short and shallow, her eyes dimming with every hour that passed. Margaret had thought the mention of Eleanor's name would stir something in Amelia's heart. But the message that finally came was not one of compassion. It read, "Mum, I'll come if you can transfer £20,000 before tomorrow. Grace said it's needed for the cleansing. Otherwise, I can't risk it." Margaret read the words again and again, feeling as though her chest were tightening with every line. Grace Pembroke, Amelia's mother-in-law, had always found ways to interfere. Since Amelia's marriage into the Pembroke family, she had changed. Once warm, curious, and thoughtful, Amelia now spoke in Grace's tones, lived by Grace's rules, and measured love in currency. Margaret picked up the phone and called her daughter. It rang for what felt like an eternity before Amelia's voice filled the room. "Mum, I told you. It's not me, it's about energy," Amelia said, her voice soft but distant. "Grace says it's bad luck to attend a funeral right after a wedding. We have to do the cleansing or it'll curse the family." Margaret's throat tightened. "Your grandmother's dying, Amelia. She's asking for you. Do you really believe your mother-in-law over your own mother?" There was silence, only the faint hum of traffic on Amelia's end. Then a sigh. "You don't understand how things work here. Grace has connections. She knows people. She's trying to protect me. Protect you from love. From saying goodbye. Mum, please. Just send the money. It's not that much for peace of mind." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. £20,000 for peace of mind, she whispered. "Is that what love costs now?" But Amelia had already ended the call. Margaret sat motionless for a long time, the rain now falling harder against the windowpane. On the mantelpiece was a photograph of Amelia as a little girl, her hands covered in flour as she helped Eleanor bake scones. They had laughed so freely then, without the shadow of money or manipulation. A knock at the door startled her. It was Dr. Benson from the hospital, his hat dripping with rain. His expression told her everything before he spoke. "Margaret," he said gently, "I'm afraid your mother doesn't have much time left." The room seemed to spin. Margaret gripped the edge of the table, her heart heavy with grief, and with anger. If Amelia would not come home for love, Margaret thought bitterly, then perhaps she would have to learn what love truly costs when the will was read. And with that thought, Margaret picked up her coat and stepped into the rain, her tears lost in the storm. By the time Margaret reached the hospital, the corridors were bathed in the muted glow of the evening lights. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. A nurse met her at the door to room 213, her expression soft but resigned. "She's still holding on," the nurse whispered. "But she's very weak." Margaret nodded and stepped inside. Her mother, Eleanor Holloway, lay motionless beneath a thin white blanket, her once vibrant face now pale as paper. The soft rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sound that filled the silence. Margaret moved closer, taking Eleanor's frail hand into her own. "Mother," she whispered. "It's me, Margaret. I'm here." Eleanor's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, cloudy with age and exhaustion, searched her daughter's face. "You came," she breathed weakly. "I never left you," Margaret replied, her voice trembling. For a long moment, neither spoke. The years of quiet distance between them seemed to dissolve in that stillness. But then, Eleanor's thin lips parted again, struggling to form words. "Where's Amelia. Margaret hesitated. She had hoped the question would not come. She couldn't make it, Margaret said softly. But she sends her love. Eleanor's brow furrowed, the faintest shadow of confusion crossing her face. Always too busy, she murmured, her voice fading into the hum of the machines. She's still my granddaughter, always. Margaret felt her throat tighten. She is, Mum. She always will be. For the next hour, Margaret sat by her mother's side, listening to the rise and fall of her breathing. Outside, the rain continued to patter against the window, like time itself refusing to pause. Then, just after midnight, the rhythm of the monitor began to slow. The nurse returned quietly, adjusting the blanket as Eleanor's hand went still in Margaret's. There was no struggle, only peace, like a candle finally surrendering to the night. Margaret pressed her mother's hand to her lips and closed her eyes. The room seemed unbearably quiet now. When she finally stood to leave, the nurse approached gently. "Do you have someone to call?" Margaret nodded faintly. "Yes," she said. "But she won't answer." She walked out into the corridor, her shoes echoing softly against the linoleum floor. At the end of the hall, the chapel light was still on. Margaret slipped inside. The little room smelled of wax and lilies. A single candle flickered on the altar. She knelt and whispered, "If you can hear me, Mum, forgive her. She's lost her way." The candle flame wavered slightly, as though in answer. When Margaret stepped back outside, her phone buzzed again. For a fleeting second, she thought, hoped, it might be Amelia. But it wasn't. It was Grace Pembroke. The message read, "We're terribly sorry for your loss, Margaret. Amelia is devastated, but she needs time to recover from the emotional strain. Please refrain from contacting her for a few days. Also, regarding Eleanor's estate, Grace's solicitor will be in touch soon." Margaret stared at the screen in disbelief. Her mother's body was barely cold, and already Grace was talking about the estate. Tears welled in her eyes, not from grief alone, but from a new, burning resolve. "Fine," she whispered into the empty corridor. "If that's how they want to play it, then let the wool speak for itself." Outside, the storm had stopped. The air was heavy and still, as if the world were waiting for what would come next. 3 days after the funeral, Devon lay beneath a low, grey sky. The church bells had stopped ringing, and the mourners had long departed, leaving Margaret Holloway alone beside the damp grave. A wreath of white roses rested at the headstone, their petals bruised by the cold wind. Eleanor's final farewell had been modest, just as she had wished. Yet one absence had hung heavily in the air, Amelia's. Margaret had waited until the last moment, still hoping her daughter might appear at the church doors. But she never came. No message, no apology, only silence. Now, as the wind swept through the cemetery, Margaret turned away, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. It was time for the reading of the will. The solicitor, Mr. Alistair Brenton, was a kind, elderly man with sharp eyes and a deliberate manner. His office in the centre of Exeter smelled faintly of leather and old books. Margaret sat opposite him at a mahogany table, her hands clasped in her lap. "I understand this must be difficult," he said softly. "But your mother was very clear in her wishes." He unfolded the document, the crackle of paper filling the stillness. "To my beloved daughter, Margaret Holloway," he read, "I leave my home, my personal effects, and the savings account held at Devonshire Bank." Margaret bowed her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "To my granddaughter, Amelia Pembroke," Mr. Brenton continued, "I leave the down payment provided for her London home. However, this gift carries a condition, that Amelia visit me at least twice a year until my passing. Should she fail to honor this, the estate may reclaim the sum, to be redirected to charitable purposes." Margaret lifted her gaze, startled. "She never came," she whispered. Mr. Brenton nodded gravely. Yes. Your mother noted that in a codicil added last year. He passed Margaret the final page, where Eleanor's elegant handwriting had grown faint but steady. If love can be bought, then let it be returned to those who cannot afford it. A chill ran through Margaret's spine. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace, tinged with quiet satisfaction. Just then, a knock echoed at the door. Mr. Brenton frowned. We aren't expecting anyone. The door opened, and in stepped Grace Pembroke, her perfume filling the room before her words did. She was dressed in black silk, her expression polished and perfectly rehearsed. Margaret, she said smoothly, I do hope you don't mind. Amelia couldn't come, she's in a delicate state after all this emotional strain. I'm here on her behalf. Margaret's jaw tightened. Of course you are. Grace smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. I understand there are certain financial details in the will. Amelia simply wants what her grandmother promised her. Mr. Brenton folded his hands. Mrs. Pembroke, the will's terms are clear. The gift was conditional, and that condition was not fulfilled. Grace's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Surely we can be reasonable, Mr. Brenton. After all, my daughter-in-law was newly married, and travel was unnecessary, Margaret cut in coldly. She was too busy believing your nonsense about curses. Grace's eyes flashed. Watch your tone, Margaret. You don't know what you're getting into. Mr. Brenton cleared his throat firmly. Ladies, please. This discussion is best left to legal correspondence. Mrs. Pembroke, you'll receive a formal notice regarding the conditional clause. Grace stood, straightening her gloves. You'll regret this, she said quietly, before sweeping from the room like a shadow of expensive malice. When the door closed, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Mr. Brenton exhaled. You should be cautious, Mrs. Holloway. That woman has influence in London. Margaret stared at the will in her hands. So did my mother, she murmured. Just a different kind. As she left the office, the wind carried the faint scent of rain once more. But beneath the grief and exhaustion, Margaret felt something stirring, something fierce and unstoppable. Grace Pembroke had taken too much already. This time, Margaret would not let her take what was left. 2 days after Amelia's unexpected visit, a letter arrived at my doorstep. It was written on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind my mother used when she sent out Christmas cards. The handwriting, neat yet trembling, made my heart stutter. It was addressed to me, but the return address said Briarview Care Home, Devon. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter from one of the nurses, Margaret Lewis. Dear Mrs. Holloway, it began, your late mother, Mrs. Edith Carter, asked me to ensure this letter reaches you after her passing. She was very particular about it. Inside the envelope was another folded sheet, my mother's own handwriting. For a moment, I could hardly breathe. I hadn't seen her writing since the argument that tore us apart. I sat by the window as the rain tapped gently against the glass, and began to read. My dearest Margaret, it began, if this reaches you, it means I have gone. I forgive you for the silence between us. You were young, hurt, and I could not find the words to mend it. But there is something you must know before I am buried under the weight of secrets. My breath caught. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. The letter continued. I did not leave you the house in Whitstable because I knew you would not want it. But what I left you is not property, it is truth. Go to the old drawer in my bedroom at Briarview. Inside, you will find a box with a photograph and a name you do not know. When you find it, you will understand everything. I froze, the room suddenly cold despite the fire burning in the hearth. My mother's bedroom, the care home had cleared it days ago after her passing. Without thinking, I called the care home. The nurse sounded startled when I asked about the box. Mrs. Holloway, she said hesitantly, "We found an old wooden box among your mother's things, but it wasn't on her inventory list. We kept it in the office, just in case. Would you like it sent to you?" "Yes," I whispered, my pulse quickening. "Please send it as soon as possible." That night, I could not sleep. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than usual. Amelia hadn't called, and I couldn't stop thinking about her strange expression when she left. What if the letter held something that would change not just my view of my mother, but of my daughter too? The next afternoon, the post arrived. The wooden box was small, with a brass clasp and a faint smell of lavender. My fingers hovered over it for a moment before I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, faded, sepia-toned. A young woman stood beside a pram outside a red brick house. The woman looked just like my mother. But the child in the pram had Amelia's eyes. And beside the photograph was a folded birth certificate. My blood ran cold as I read the name written there. It wasn't mine. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The words on the birth certificate blurred before my eyes, but one name stood out, Eliza Carter. Date of birth, 1986. Mother, Edith Carter. Father, unknown. I was born in 1970. That meant Eliza came 16 years later, after me. Yet there was no mention of a second daughter in my mother's will, nor had anyone in Whitstable ever spoken her name. My mind whirled. Who was Eliza Carter? Why did the child in the photograph look so much like Amelia? I spread the photograph across the kitchen table, comparing the delicate curve of the child's mouth, the soft wave of hair, the unmistakable spark in those eyes. It was as if Amelia herself had been born twice. The thought made me shiver. That evening, I phoned the care home again and asked to speak to Nurse Lewis. When she came on the line, her tone was careful, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "your mother mentioned Eliza once, many years ago. She told me she'd lost her, that she was taken away when she was very young." I didn't pry. "Your mother was a private woman." "Taken away," I repeated. "By whom?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But your mother kept a small silver locket. Inside was a picture of a baby and a strand of blonde hair. She used to polish it every Sunday." After we ended the call, I sat in silence. Rain lashed the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 10. I opened the box again, half expecting the locket to appear, but it wasn't there. Instead, something else caught my attention, a faint inscription on the back of the photograph. I held it under the lamp. In faded ink were the words, "For E, with love. You'll always be safe with them." Them. Who were they? The next morning, I drove to Devon. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads slick and gleaming. The Briarview Care Home stood quiet on a hill overlooking the sea. The staff recognized me instantly and led me to my mother's old room. It had been cleared out, just as I'd imagined, bare walls, empty drawers, the faint smell of lavender still lingering in the air. I ran my hand over the dressing table. A faint mark in the dust showed where the wooden box had once rested. Then I noticed a loose corner in the wallpaper near the bed. When I peeled it back, a folded letter slipped to the floor. The envelope had my mother's handwriting again, but this time, it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Amelia Holloway. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Why would my mother write to my daughter, and not tell me? With trembling hands, I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single page. "My dear Amelia," it began, "if you are reading this, then the truth has already found you. I loved you as my own, though you were never meant to know. Forgive your mother, for she only did what she thought was right." The world tilted beneath me. My vision blurred. What did she mean, forgive your mother? The last line made my knees buckle. You were never Margaret's to begin with. The words on that letter echoed in my head like a curse. You were never Margaret's to begin with. I read it again and again, hoping I had misread, that somehow my mother's frail handwriting had betrayed her true meaning. But no. Each word cut deeper than the last. By the time I drove back from Devon, the sky had turned the color of slate. Rain lashed against the windscreen, and the wipers beat in rhythm with the chaos in my mind. Amelia wasn't answering her phone. I called again and again, straight to voicemail. When I reached my house, I found the kitchen light on. My breath caught. Amelia's car was parked outside. I stepped inside slowly. She was there, standing by the table, the wooden box open before her. The photograph and the birth certificate lay exposed, as if she had been waiting for me. Her expression was calm, too calm. "So," she said softly, "you know." I swallowed hard. "Know what, Amelia?" She gave a small, bitter smile. "Don't play dumb, Mum. Or should I call you Margaret? That's what she called you, didn't she?" Edith. The way she said my mother's name made something twist in my chest. "Where did you get that letter?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "She sent me one too," Amelia replied, tapping her temple. "Before she died. Only mine came earlier. She told me everything." My heart thudded painfully. "Everything?" "That I wasn't yours," Amelia said flatly. "That I was Eliza's child." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "That's not true," I said, though the words felt hollow even as they left my mouth. Amelia's eyes glistened, but her voice didn't tremble. She said Eliza was her real daughter. You, her firstborn, were sent away to live with father after the divorce. But when Eliza got pregnant at 16, Edith took the baby and raised her as yours. She said you'd understand one day. Did you? My throat closed. I remembered the years after I'd left home, the silence from my mother, the bitterness that grew between us. She had told me she couldn't forgive me for what I'd done. But I never knew what she meant. "Amelia," I whispered, stepping closer. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't." "Didn't you?" she said coldly. "Or didn't you want to?" She turned her gaze towards the window, where the rain streaked down in silver lines. "All my life, you've treated me like I reminded you of something you hated. Maybe now I know why." I shook my head fiercely. "No, that's not it. You're my daughter. Whatever that paper says, whatever my mother wrote, it doesn't change that." But she was already walking towards the door. "It changes everything," she said quietly. "I'm going to find Eliza." I froze. "Eliza is dead." Amelia turned. "No, Mum. She isn't. I found her." 2 days passed without a single word from Amelia. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt, only to fall again when it wasn't her. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, silent, except for the sound of wind moving through the cracks of the old windows. Then, on the third morning, an envelope slid through the letterbox. There was no return address. Just my name, written in a sharp, deliberate hand. Inside was a single note. "If you want the truth, come to Whitby. Harbour View Cottage. She's waiting." No signature. But the handwriting, thin, elegant, was unmistakable. It was Amelia's. By afternoon, I was already on the road. The long drive north felt endless, grey skies stretching over the moors, seagulls circling above the cliffs. When I finally reached Whitby, the tide was low, revealing dark rocks slick with seaweed. The air smelled of salt and rain. Harbour View Cottage stood on the edge of the bay, its windows fogged and paint peeling from the sills. As I approached, I saw a figure standing at the doorway. She was tall, slender, wrapped in a pale blue shawl that flapped in the wind. Her hair was silver blonde, her face pale but familiar in a way that made my breath catch. For a heartbeat, I thought I was looking at my mother. But when she spoke, her voice was softer, uncertain. You must be Margaret. I nodded slowly. Eliza. She gave a faint smile. You've aged well, sister. The word sister felt heavy, like a stone dropping into still water. I didn't move, couldn't. I simply stared at her, this woman I'd been told had died before she reached adulthood. Eliza stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Inside, the cottage smelled of damp wood and old lavender. The fire crackled faintly, and on the small table sat 2 teacups, and Amelia. She was sitting there, calm, her eyes red but determined. Mum, she said softly, I wanted you to hear her side before you hate her forever. Hate her? I whispered, looking from Amelia to Eliza. I don't even understand. Eliza's eyes glistened. You were sent away after the divorce. I stayed. Mother, she was lonely, bitter. When I found out I was pregnant, she told me she'd fix everything. She said no one would ever know. Her voice cracked. She made me disappear, Margaret. She sent me to Scotland to have the baby. When I came back, she told everyone I'd died of fever. And she gave the baby to you. I felt as though the air had been punched from my lungs. She gave me your child, I whispered. Amelia. Eliza nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I never stopped searching for her. But Mother kept everything hidden, changed her name, moved you both away. I thought she'd gone forever. The room was silent except for the wind outside. Amelia stood, her hands trembling. You mean you're my real mother, she said, her voice breaking. Eliza reached for her, but Amelia stepped back. No, she whispered. You can't just say that after all these years. You left me. I didn't have a choice, Eliza cried. I was 16, Amelia. Mother said she'd destroy us both if I spoke. Amelia turned to me then, her eyes filled with tears and fury. You knew something, she said. You must have. I shook my head helplessly. No. I swear, I didn't. She told me you were gone, Eliza. I never questioned her. But Amelia wasn't listening anymore. She turned towards the door, her face pale, her voice trembling. I can't do this. I don't know who any of you are. She ran out into the rain before either of us could stop her. By the time I reached the doorway, she was already gone, disappearing down the cliff path towards the sea. The wind tore at my coat as I chased Amelia along the narrow cliff path. Rain lashed my face, blinding me, but I could hear her cries carried across the moor. My heart pounded, not from exertion but from the dread that she might vanish into the mist, leaving all truths unsaid. I finally reached the edge where the cliffs dropped sharply into the churning sea below. There she was, standing perilously close to the edge, her hair whipping around her face, her eyes locked on the grey waves. Eliza! I shouted, Amelia, step back. She didn't move. Instead, she turned her gaze to me, tears mixing with the rain. Why did she take you from me? Why did she lie about everything? I hesitated. How could I explain the lies of a woman long gone, the cruelty of a mother who had manipulated all our lives? But the sound of the sea, the storm rising, demanded action. I took a cautious step forward, then another, until I stood beside her, keeping my hands out but careful not to touch her suddenly. Eliza didn't abandon you, Amelia, I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. She was trapped. Mother, Edith, made sure she had no choice. For a moment, the wind seemed to pause, as if the storm itself was listening. Amelia's chest heaved, and she seemed to tremble between anger and despair. I don't even know who I am anymore, she whispered. You are Amelia, Eliza said from behind me, her voice firm but trembling. You are strong. You survived because of the love I never stopped feeling, even when I couldn't reach you. Amelia finally turned fully, her eyes meeting Eliza's. "And you?" she asked, voice softening. "You were there all this time?" "I was there," Eliza said. "Watching, waiting, hoping you'd find me." The clouds parted for a brief moment, sunlight breaking through the rain and illuminating the bay below. The sea raged, but in that light, I saw a fragile bridge forming between mother and daughter. Amelia swallowed hard. I need time," she said, finally stepping back from the cliff edge. "I can't forgive yet. But I want to understand." Eliza nodded, stepping closer, a hand extended but not forced upon her. "Then let me help you understand. No more lies. No more secrets." I watched them stand there, drenched by the storm, two figures confronting decades of pain and absence. And in that moment, I realized that some wounds could be stitched with patience, truth, and the courage to face the past, even if the waves below roared like ghosts of old regrets. The storm began to ease, leaving only the rhythmic crush of the tide and the first glimmers of sunlight on Whitby's cliffs.